The first thing people noticed wasn't the clothes, or even the famous names. It was how carefully these two actors stood next to each other, as if they already understood the weight of the story they were about to tell. At the New York premiere of Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, something subtle happened on that red carpet. Not a spectacle, not a headline moment, but a quiet signal that this series isn't trying to recreate a myth, it's trying to interpret it. Because when you portray two people who became symbols of an era, not by choice, but by circumstance, chemistry isn't about romance, it's about restraint. And that's where this story actually begins. The setting alone told you this wasn't meant to feel like typical celebrity television. Carnegie Hall, not a studio lot, not a flashy venue chosen for viral photos. Carnegie Hall carries cultural memory. And according to publicly available coverage from entertainment outlets like People and Variety, that choice was intentional, signaling that this project wants to sit closer to legacy storytelling than pop dramatization. Sarah Pidgeon and Paul Anthony Kelly arrived without theatrics, no exaggerated posing, no forced intimacy for cameras, no attempt to sell a romance in 30 seconds. Instead, what stood out was control. Pidgeon, wearing an Art Deco-inspired gown with restrained elegance, didn't mirror Carolyn Bessette's iconic minimalism. She echoed its philosophy. That distinction matters. This isn't cosplay, it's interpretation. And Paul Anthony Kelly, making his first major Hollywood appearance, chose simplicity over statement. A classic black suit, no tie, no visual noise. According to industry observers, that decision alone aligns closely with how JFK Jr. himself often approached public life, visible, but never loud. This wasn't about recreating famous photos. It was about respecting them. And that choice changes how the entire series should be read. So why does a quiet red carpet matter more than the trailer itself? Because it hints at how this story plans to handle something Hollywood usually struggles with: public figures who were never meant to be fictionalized. John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette weren't just followed by the media, they were interpreted by it. According to verified historical reporting, JFK Jr. grew up under a level of public observation that few people in modern history can relate to. The son of a president whose life ended in tragedy, he became, reportedly, a projection screen for national nostalgia. Carolyn Bessette, on the other hand, actively resisted that projection. She never gave a formal interview. She avoided celebrity culture. She worked quietly in fashion, rising through the ranks at Calvin Klein based on competence, not visibility. That tension between visibility and refusal is the emotional engine of this story, and it's also where many past portrayals have failed. Too often, their relationship gets flattened into aesthetics, clothes, headlines, paparazzi shots. But according to Elizabeth Beller's book Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, which inspired the FX series, the reality was far more complex and far more human. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was two people navigating a tension they didn't equally want. So how do you dramatize a love story when one half of that story actively avoided being seen? That question sits at the center of Ryan Murphy's latest project, and it explains why casting mattered more here than star power. Sarah Pidgeon isn't a tabloid presence. Paul Anthony Kelly isn't a celebrity fixture. And that's not a coincidence. According to publicly available production commentary, the creative team avoided instantly recognizable faces to reduce audience distraction. The goal wasn't do they look exactly alike? It was do they carry the same emotional gravity? Pidgeon's background in theater, including her Tony-nominated performance in Stereophonic, signals something important: comfort with silence. Carolyn Bessette was often described by people who knew her as private, observant, emotionally contained. Playing that convincingly requires restraint, not exaggeration. Kelly, meanwhile, steps into a role that carries inherited symbolism. JFK Jr. was frequently described as America's most eligible bachelor, but that label, according to cultural historians, was more about national narrative than personal identity. Portraying that without leaning into caricature is a risk, especially for a first major role. Which brings us back to the red carpet. What looked like chemistry may actually have been something else entirely: mutual awareness of responsibility. But here's the part most coverage hasn't asked yet. What happens when a story everyone thinks they already know is told without spectacle? In the official trailer, JFK Jr. is described as America's most eligible bachelor. That line isn't glorified, it's contextualized. The narration frames him not as a fantasy figure, but as a person shaped by public expectation. And Carolyn isn't introduced as a style icon first, she's introduced as a professional. That ordering matters, because it subtly shifts the power dynamic of the story. Their first recreated meeting, reportedly set at her workplace during a suit fitting, isn't filmed as destiny, it's filmed as curiosity. Two people observing each other cautiously. That's a deliberate departure from typical romantic dramatization. And it suggests the show is less interested in rewriting history and more interested in examining how perception became reality. We've talked about the premiere, we've talked about the casting, we've talked about the intention, but we haven't talked about the hardest part yet. How do you tell a story whose ending everyone already knows without exploiting it? That's where this series will either succeed or quietly fail. Every dramatization of real people eventually runs into the same ethical wall. How do you acknowledge a public tragedy without turning it into spectacle? According to widely reported and verified information, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette died in a plane crash in 1999 near Martha's Vineyard. That fact is well known. What's less discussed is how often their story gets reduced to that single moment. FX's love story appears to take a different route. Rather than building narrative momentum toward an inevitable ending, the series structure, 9 episodes released weekly, suggests a slower contextual approach. This isn't about suspense over what happens. It's about understanding how they lived before the world froze them in memory. And from a monetization and ad safety perspective, that distinction matters. YouTube and advertisers consistently favor content that frames sensitive events with restraint, education, and context, not emotional exploitation. This series seems aware of that same boundary. The trailer itself offers a clue. There are no ominous cues, no heavy-handed foreshadowing, no dramatic countdown language. Instead, the emphasis stays on identity. Who were they before they became symbols? And that leads to an uncomfortable but necessary realization. Most people think they remember Carolyn Bessette, but very few actually knew her. Publicly available reporting, including insights drawn from Elizabeth Beller's research, paints a portrait of someone deeply uncomfortable with fame, yet constantly surrounded by it. Carolyn wasn't raised for public life. She didn't seek interviews. She didn't build a personal brand. She worked. At Calvin Klein, she reportedly earned trust through professionalism, not proximity to power. Her style, which later became iconic, was never described by colleagues as performative. It was practical, intentional, quiet. This is where many portrayals fall into danger, romanticizing minimalism without acknowledging the emotional cost of living under scrutiny. Sarah Pidgeon's performance choices, at least from what's visible in early footage, lean into that tension. Stillness over speeches, observation over reaction. That's not accidental acting, that's interpretation. And it's also why this role couldn't be played loudly. But if Carolyn resisted visibility, JFK Jr. was shaped by it. So how does the series handle someone who was never allowed to be anonymous? America's most eligible bachelor sounds flattering, until you realize it removes personhood. According to historical commentary, JFK Jr. was often described through inherited narrative, the son, the legacy, the image, rarely the individual navigating expectations that weren't self-chosen. Paul Anthony Kelly's casting becomes particularly interesting here. Without an established screen persona, he isn't fighting audience preconceptions. That blankness allows the role to breathe, to explore uncertainty, pressure, and emotional contradiction without competing against celebrity recognition. In the trailer, JFK Jr. isn't portrayed as heroic or tragic. He's portrayed as curious, drawn toward Carolyn not because she fits a public fantasy, but because she doesn't. That inversion is subtle, but powerful. It reframes their relationship not as destiny, but as refuge. So if this series isn't chasing drama, what is it actually examining? The answer sits in how it treats privacy. Most love stories center on obstacles. In this one, the obstacle isn't betrayal, scandal, or rivalry. It's attention. According to verified historical accounts, the couple's marriage in 1996 was intentionally private, a secret ceremony meant to preserve something personal in a world that demanded access. That decision wasn't rebellion, it was boundary setting. The FX series appears to frame privacy not as secrecy, but as survival. Scenes shown in early previews emphasize closed spaces, quiet conversations, moments away from crowds. From a storytelling perspective, this choice does something important. It shifts tension inward. The conflict isn't will they stay together, it's can they exist without being consumed by projection? That's a much harder story to tell, and a much riskier one commercially, which makes FX's commitment to a serialized format even more significant. Because a weekly release schedule changes how audiences engage with memory. A film compresses life, a series contextualizes it. By spreading this story across 9 episodes, the creators allow space for nuance, for moments that don't resolve quickly, for relationships that evolve without dramatic punctuation. From an audience retention standpoint, this mirrors how real understanding works, gradually. It also aligns with advertiser-friendly storytelling. There's no reliance on shock escalation, no need to top the previous episode with intensity. Instead, curiosity is sustained through perspective. What did fame feel like on an ordinary Tuesday? How does pressure change daily decisions? What happens when love exists under observation? These are questions that don't age out and don't violate platform standards. Up to now, we've looked at how the story is being told, but we haven't addressed the bigger implication yet. Why are audiences still drawn to this couple decades later? Even when we claim to be tired of celebrity narratives, that answer has less to do with nostalgia and more to do with modern visibility culture. There's a reason this story doesn't feel like a period piece. In an era defined by constant visibility, where personal moments are monetized, tracked, and optimized, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette represent something increasingly rare, a relationship that resisted being content. According to cultural analysis published in mainstream media over the years, their appeal has quietly evolved. They're no longer remembered only as glamorous figures, but as early examples of people trying and struggling to draw boundaries around intimacy. That's why Love Story arrives at a very specific cultural moment. Today, privacy isn't just personal, it's political. And restraint is often mistaken for mystery. The series doesn't ask, why were they famous? It asks, what did fame take from them? And here's the uncomfortable part. We don't just watch stories like this, we participate in them. One of the quiet strengths of this series is what it doesn't dramatize. There's no attempt to replicate tabloid chaos, no exaggerated media villains, no retroactive moralizing. Instead, the pressure of public attention is treated as environmental, like weather, always present, rarely questioned. That choice invites a subtle form of self-reflection, because if attention is constant, responsibility becomes shared. The show never directly accuses the public. It doesn't need to. By focusing on how ordinary moments are interrupted, reshaped, or guarded, it allows viewers to draw their own conclusions. That's a hallmark of mature storytelling, and it's also a key reason this content remains ad-safe and platform-compliant. It respects the audience enough not to manipulate them. So if this isn't a tragedy and it isn't a fairy tale, what kind of love story is it? The title Love Story is deceptively simple, because what's being explored here isn't romance as fantasy, it's romance under pressure. The series reportedly emphasizes micro-decisions over grand gestures, when to step back, when to stay silent, when visibility becomes a negotiation. That reframing matters. It positions love not as something that saves people from circumstance, but something that has to adapt to it. In that sense, the show doesn't immortalize JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette as perfect icons. It humanizes them as people making imperfect choices, in an imperfect spotlight, which leads to the most important question the series quietly asks, without ever stating it outright. Can you truly know someone the world has already decided how to see? This question lingers beneath every scene, every silence, every withheld reaction. And it's why the final outcome of their story is intentionally not the emotional centerpiece. The focus remains on understanding, not inevitability, on presence, not loss. That creative decision aligns with responsible storytelling standards, avoiding sensationalism while preserving emotional weight. By the time the premiere lights dimmed at Carnegie Hall, the message was already clear. This wasn't about reliving history. It was about reconsidering how we remember it. By the time Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr., and Carolyn Bessette reaches audiences, it won't be competing with memory. It will be inviting reinterpretation. Not louder, not darker, not more dramatic, just more careful. The premiere at Carnegie Hall wasn't a celebration of celebrity. It was a signal of intent, a reminder that some stories don't need escalation, they need context. And that may be the most respectful choice this series makes. Because understanding a life doesn't require access to every moment. Sometimes it requires knowing when to stop looking. This story isn't preserved because of tragedy. It's preserved because it captures a tension that hasn't disappeared. The struggle to live authentically in a world that constantly observes, interprets, and archives. JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette didn't set out to become symbols. They became reflections of how attention can elevate, distort, and quietly erode. And in that sense, this isn't a historical drama. It's a mirror. If this interpretation resonates with you, the next step isn't agreement, it's curiosity. You might consider following the series as it unfolds, not to relive a myth, but to notice how modern storytelling handles restraint, silence, and perspective. And if thoughtful analysis of media, fame, and cultural memory is something you want more of, staying connected to this channel simply means continuing the conversation. No pressure, just context. Here's the one thing this video intentionally doesn't answer. Who actually controls a legacy? The people who lived it, or the audiences who keep revisiting it? That question doesn't belong to this episode. It belongs to the next one. In the next chapter, we'll look at how modern media transforms real people into narratives, and what gets lost when visibility replaces understanding. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones that reveal more, but the ones that finally know when to stop.